To kick things off today, I wanted to start off with this photo that I took last weekend in Jedediah State Park. I'm actually in Oregon right now. I've been in New York City for most of the pandemic, and I came out to Oregon, to the West Coast about a month ago to support my family with some things. And I felt so grateful to be back and surrounded by nature. The redwoods are trees. If you haven't seen them, they're pretty magical. And they're 800 to 1500 years old. And I just wanted to kind of start today's conversation with a note on nature and how powerful it is, and really kind of set the tone for today's conversation around that theme. Again, this is Jedediah State Park, and it is Tolowa DNI Indigenous land. If you are not familiar with how to find out what native land you're on, there is a great platform. You can go to native-land.ca, and you're able to see the different Indigenous land that you're on. So I highly recommend looking that up and familiarizing yourself with the land that you are on. So today, what we are going to be covering in this talk, which is the Savvy Traveler's Guide to Going Green, are some actionable tips and stereotypes. Stereotypes to smash to go greener when you travel. And I've outlined each of these through each part of your travel experience, thinking about the platform that you're booking on, to where you stay and what you do when you're going there. This is an overview talk. I've crammed a lot into a short amount of time. There's several topics in here that you could go much deeper on. I could talk about a couple of these slides for an hour in and of themselves, but I've really tried to frame this conversation into thinking about your travel experience as a whole, understanding how you can go greener, and then finding easy solutions to be able to do so. So to dive in again, if we haven't connected before, my name is Kelley. I am a travel entrepreneur passionate about storytelling and sustainability. I'm the founder of Impact Travel Alliance, which is the world's largest community for socially and eco-conscious travelers. My background is rooted in journalism, and I've since expanded into a career in marketing, and I've worked to support brands in 20 plus destinations, ranging from huge corporations like Booking.com down to small mom and pop businesses that are just run by one person. All of those brands that I work with are kind of tied by a common thread of having a core mission to improve the world through travel. I am currently serving on the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Sustainable Tourism, and I'm also an advisor to the Future of Tourism Coalition. So that's just a little bit of background information on me. If this is your first Impact Travel Alliance event and you are just being introduced to our community, ITA is a global nonprofit, a global community and 501c3 nonprofit that's aimed at improving the world through travel. To date, since our launch in 2015, we've hosted more than 400 events through our local chapter network. And I really see this session as a culmination of many of those learnings. These are our local chapters around the world. We just hit, this is 25 local chapters. We recently hit 30 local chapters around the world. And again, that we've hosted 400 events since our launch in 2015. Each of those events are designed to help travelers understand how they can travel sustainably anywhere. I like to think of ITA as your friend within the industry. As I mentioned, ITA is an independent 501c3 nonprofit. So we're not trying to sell you anything. Our core mission is just rooted in educating travelers how to explore in a way that has a positive impact on the world. Everything that we do is really rooted in that mission, and we try to do so in a way that is down to earth and straightforward. Last but not least, I do want to just emphasize that Impact Travel Alliance is a global platform for local voices. So again, really thinking about the power of our local chapter network and those change makers around the world who are really pushing for a more sustainable travel industry through educating travelers. Today in my presentation on the Savvy Traveler's Guide to Going Green, My goal is to embrace sustainability as a journey. So no matter where you are on your sustainability journey, whether you're well-versed in the space or you're new to it and just getting started, my goal for you today is to spark some curiosity for you to go deeper on your journey. With green travel in particular, we hear a lot from media headlines about here's plastic swaps that you can make, or here's a reusable tote or a reusable water bottle that you can use. I'll touch upon some of those topics. My goal is really to go a lot deeper and to expand that conversation of green travel into a broader mindset. So Booking.com has some really great data on sustainable travel habits and travelers' habits in general. They recently produced a study that really looked at sustainability survey trends in 2020. One thing that I think is really interesting, normally I hate word clouds just because I don't think that there's a lot that you can really glean from them. But you can see that environment is a huge takeaway, that most travelers are really correlating sustainability with the environment. And in reality, the environment is just one component of what sustainability looks like. So my most important takeaway for you all today is not only to think about sustainable tourism as something that represents more than just the environment, but I want everyone to also start to think about how each of these things are interconnected. So we do not talk about this enough. Climate justice is racial justice, and we cannot talk about climate justice without first talking about racial justice. So if this is your only takeaway for today, that is the most important thing that I would like you to glean from this conversation. BIPOC communities, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color, are the most affected and usually the ones who are most underrepresented in solutions-oriented conversations. So that's really something that you need to keep top of mind in terms of how we're thinking of ways that we can go greener or how we can combat the climate crisis, is just thinking about our own identity as well, and using that perspective, and also really relying on other perspectives as well, because the climate crisis is a complex problem and it's going to require complex solutions, and that only becomes from diversity in these solutions-oriented conversations. So I do want to share a couple of resources, most specifically, generally speaking, for white people right now. I'm going to kick it off with a quick video from Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. She's a marine biologist. She's a badass. If you're not following her, you should be. But she summarizes this much better than I could. So I'm going to go ahead and play this quick video so you can hear it from her own words.
And a marine biologist. There are definitely days when I wake up in the morning and I wonder why I'm doing ocean conservation when there are so many other important things happening in the world. There are all these injustices, there are all these political challenges, there are families getting torn apart, but ocean conservation really is about people. It's about protecting coastal cultures, it's about our health and well-being, our economies, and so this work is important not just in the long term for the health of the planet, but also on a day-to-day basis for a lot of people who depend on the ocean. I'm Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson.
Let me go back to full screen. Perfect. So she also has a lot of great resources that are out there, including an excellent book that came out last year. She has a podcast, so I highly encourage you to follow her work, also to make an intentional effort to seek out diverse stories. I have a couple of resources that I pulled. Megan, if you are here, if you could share those top two, I do have links to them that she can share in the chat. And this Washington Post story is an article that just came out this last week, and I wanted to share a quick quote from it. And the author writes, "Given little support by white philanthropists, environmental justice groups run by Black, Latino, Native American, and Alaskan Native advocates historically have been as impoverished as the communities that they represent. While white environmentalist groups tended to focus on wilderness and wildlife, activists fighting for everything from toxic dumps in Alabama to massive oil and gas refineries in California have largely been working in the shadows. And I really like this article in particular because it highlights many activists who have been working for far beyond my own lifetime and my own career, and highlights different BIPOC activists and really showcases the work that they're doing. So I highly encourage that read. I did actually discover that article from the Anti-Racism Daily, and the Anti-Racism Daily is a great daily newsletter that you can sign up for. They also have a podcast, and we'll share a link to that as well. Following the event, I can also share all of these links in a post-event email so that you all have them for access as well. But there's a great podcast episode in particular that is worth listening to called Advocating for Climate Justice. And then another book that I actually just started reading within the last week or so touches upon a lot of these themes, and it's called Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. And she writes that there's nothing feminist about having so many resources at your fingertips and choosing to be ignorant. Nothing empowering or enlightening in deciding that intent trumps impact, especially when the consequences aren't going to be experienced by you, but will instead be experienced by someone from a marginalized community. So I highly, again, this is the most important takeaway from today's topic. I put it at the beginning for the reason. So I highly encourage you to listen to these stories and to make an intentional effort to seek them out. I also encourage you to share your own story. The words that I say and the stories that I tell are going to resonate in a different way with different audiences than your stories will. So I encourage you to use your own unique voice to advocate for change. Before we dive into thinking about your travel experience as a whole, again, I'm going to cover different parts of your travel experience from what you pack to where you're going. But I did want to make sure that I covered some ground and made sure that we're all on the same page in terms of thinking about what sustainable travel is. So sustainable tourism is travel that has a positive impact on local communities, the economy, and the environment. So while eco-travel, which we saw from the Booking.com study, is most often associated with sustainability, it's just one piece of the puzzle. So there's a lot of language and buzzwords out there, and I think sometimes it can be especially confusing for travelers to really have a concrete understanding of what sustainable travel looks like. But I encourage you not to get caught up in the language or the buzzwords and really just distill it into people, planet, profit. It's just a triple bottom line approach that has a positive impact on our world. There's a lot of buzzwords out there. Again, the New York Times published an article earlier this year with the headline, "Move Over Sustainable Travel, Regenerative Travel Has Arrived." For those unfamiliar, regenerative travel is a type of travel that's rooted in the circular economy. And it's really essentially going beyond just minimizing harm and actively working toward making a system better. But again, don't feel like you have to get caught up in the nuances of the language or the different terms. My motive today is just to provide you with the knowledge and resources to travel in a way that supports locals and protects our environment. So when you reframe the conversation of sustainability around those core purposes, you can see how it can be applied to any type of travel, no matter where you're going, what your budget is, or what your travel style looks like. I also want to note, because I think that a lot of sustainable travel professionals get really caught up in talking about the ethics of travel or how travel can be responsible. At the end of the day, it's just the best type of travel. It's kind of a travel hack so that you can find the most immersive experiences. You can connect directly with nature. You can connect more closely with locals. So there's all of these really cool opportunities that come from embracing the sustainable travel mindset. I also wanted to define intersectionality. So in the 1980s, Professor Kimberly Williams Crenshaw coined the term to describe the way that race and gender impact Black women in the justice system. And it essentially talks about how race, class, gender, and other characteristics all intersect with one another and overlap. So again, when we're talking about sustainable travel, that's why I have this in the little Venn diagram. You can see how everything kind of intersects and works together toward a more impactful opportunity for us as travelers and the industry as well. Intersectionality, again, I think it's really important to always reference Kimberly Crenshaw when you're talking about it, as to make sure that the term stays true to its original meaning. But with that kind of inspiration in mind, I did want to share an example of something that is a really cool example of the intersectionality of sustainable travel. So this I pulled from an adventure.com article, and that is, Can Indigenous Tourism Help to Protect the Great Barrier Reef? Again, we'll share all of these links as well, but I wanted to talk about this one in particular because I think that this is a really cool example about the power of travel. So in 2016, parts of the Great Barrier Reef experienced massive coral bleaching. So that's a problem not only for the climate, but it's also a really big PR disaster for tourism in the region. So when these travelers heard about how the coral was being bleached and it was dying, that resulted in less travelers wanting to visit the region. So there's a really cool local company, and again, this is pulled inspiration from this story on adventure.com, so I encourage you to read closer on the article and learn more about it. But it's a company called the Dreamtime Dive and Snorkel Tour, and it's been running for just over a year, and it's a collaboration between 4 local indigenous tribes. So travelers actually explore the reef with an Indigenous ranger and a marine biologist as well. And I think that that's a really cool opportunity to talk about how you can go out and see the Great Barrier Reef and experience the magic that exists underwater there. And do so from looking at it from both a scientific perspective as well as an Indigenous perspective, and learn more about all of that in a way that is supporting that triple bottom line approach for sustainability. So this is the elephant in the room for my talk today. Can travel be sustainable? And this is one of my most frequently asked questions. It's usually when I'm on a panel and I only have about a minute to answer it. So again, I really want to dive deeper into all of this throughout the session today. And in reference to the Great Barrier Reef example that I was just talking about, there's a great quote from the article where David Wachenfeld, apologies if I mispronounce your name, the chief scientist of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. And he said, "I think we need to be really clear that the Great Barrier Reef is an amazing place. It has been damaged by climate change, and climate change is getting worse. Globally, we have not done anything near enough to get it under control. It's a global problem. It needs a global solution. I know that when people come and see the Great Barrier Reef, they have to fall in love with it. And falling in love with it, they immediately want to know what they can do to protect it." So I do want to just talk about kind of 3 different benefits that come from travel. First of all, is it turns you into an advocate for nature. For example, the Great Barrier Reef is an opportunity to become an advocate for learning more about ocean conservation and coral. You could go to see the Northern Lights. You could go to a rainforest somewhere, and all of those are opportunities that get us a little bit closer to those stories that we hear about the climate crisis, and empower us to want to be able to protect our Earth. Secondly, it supports conservation efforts. So I included a picture of a gorilla here. If you've been following our Events That Impact Travel Alliance throughout the pandemic online, you know that we did host an event last year that talked about the pandemic's impact on conservation efforts, specifically looking at the gorillas in Uganda. So we do have a recording if you want to learn more about the links between travelers visiting the region and how those conservation efforts are supported. Last but not least, I also want to recognize that there's an opportunity to celebrate innovation within the industry. So while flying and getting on a plane, of course, has a large impact on our carbon footprint, there are brands out there that are actively working to innovate, use more fuel efficient systems, find ways to reduce their waste, reduce their impact. So there's opportunities to support those brands and to vote with your tourism dollars for the industry of the future. At the end of the day, travelers are in control of the industry. If you're not out there purchasing and supporting the brands that you believe in, those brands cease to exist without your tourism dollars. So diving into thinking about your next trip. And I know that this is on kind of everyone's mind right now as we're looking toward the future with a little bit more of an optimistic eye in a post-pandemic world. When you are thinking about going to your next trip and you think about green travel, most people envision a place like this. This is Costa Rica. And of course, you can visit a destination like Costa Rica. I love it there. I've been several times and I would love to go several more times. And you can do so in a green and a conscious way. But you can also visit a destination like New York City and do so with a nod to urban sustainability. So I've included a couple of quick examples here. On the left, you see Rooftop Reds. Rooftop Reds is the first commercially viable winery and vineyard in New York City. So at the bottom there, you actually see where they're growing grapes on a rooftop with the city in the background. And I think that that's a really cool, and they do so with a completely sustainable focus. And so I think that that's a really cool way to think about these opportunities to go outside of the box when we're considering green travel. And do so in a way that is as simple as enjoying a glass of wine on a rooftop in Brooklyn. Of course, you can go on completely the other side of the spectrum as well. I don't think that most people expect me to have a picture of Times Square in my session on going green when you travel. But I did want to make a point here just to say that there are opportunities to do those top 10 lists or those bucket list items. Maybe you've always wanted to go to New York City and you just really want to see Times Square. I hear that a lot. I think New Yorkers are always kind of wondering why, but you can do so in a way that is eco-conscious and sustainable. So I did want to give a shout out to New York City Urban Adventures. They have a fantastic tour of Times Square that is done in an eco-conscious way. One of the things that I love about Urban Adventures as well, I do it a lot of times when I'm visiting a new city for the first time because you're you're in a small tour. And it's a small walking group. And so you can get to know your local guide and have a lot of conversations with them on a more one-on-one level. And many of the tours also teach you how to ride public transportation. It's actually part of the tour where you learn more about public transportation. And that's a great tip to travel in a more eco-friendly way, as well as to see the destination in a more intimate way. So thinking about transportation and getting around, generally speaking, there's varying levels of your environmental footprint depending on how you're getting around. Generally speaking, you're going to have the lowest impact when you're walking, highest impact when you're flying. So you can kind of go up from there and think about it in terms of walking, train, bus, car, and plane. And every time you kind of go up a little bit more, you're going to have a much higher carbon footprint. This is pulled from a BBC article on climate change called "Should You Fly, Drive, or Take the Train?" So I think it's just important to kind of consider opportunities closer to home as well. You can walk around your neighborhood, explore a new spot, and really embrace the joy of travel from home. And I think that that's something that we've all been doing in the last year since the pandemic happened, and really embracing the mindset and the joy of travel from domestic locations and kind of finding more opportunities to get out and explore in a way that's closer to us. And that also has less of a carbon footprint. So I get this question a lot as well. Why is it so hard to find an eco-friendly flight? Again, in broad strokes, just to kind of break this down, your footprint flying on a plane is going to differ depending on whether you're flying JetBlue or United or Delta. but it's also going to differ depending on how old that plane is, how fuel efficient that specific carrier is. There's all of those little differences wherein you can't just say this certain brand is the most eco-friendly flight, or this transatlantic flight could work well for one carrier, but it's different for another carrier. So there's a lot of different factors that you really have to consider. I would encourage you to learn a little bit more about the airline sustainability initiatives. There are some out there. I really love JetBlue, for example. I think that they're doing a great job in terms of what their CSR, their corporate social responsibility looks like, and making sure that they're always working on innovating and doing better in a way that is more eco-conscious. So there's a lot that you can learn there about ways to find eco-friendly flights, but it is really complicated because it varies from brand to brand, destination to destination, depending on if you're taking a layover somewhere, if you're taking a direct flight. So there's a lot that goes into that. If you want the easy solution, go to Skyscanner. Skyscanner will show you all of the different options to help you find the best flight. And they have this cool little greener choice label. And so they have a really complex algorithm that weighs out, and you can actually see this flight emits 8% less carbon, or this one has 5% less carbon. So you can weigh those out and you can see that these two more eco-friendly flights actually cost less than this other one. And what I love about this as well, because Skyscanner is a huge company that's tracking a lot of data. So every time you click something with a greener choices label, you can bet they're paying attention to that data. And so every time you're booking that flight, you're not only flying in a greener way, but you're also advocating for greener industry. Some tips to go green when you are getting around. Think about your route as a whole. A couple of years ago, I went to Scotland and I figured out that the most eco-friendly way to get there was actually a direct flight from New York City to London. And then I took a train up to Scotland, and I loved seeing that scenery. It was a more relaxing way for me to get there. So just think outside of the box a little bit when you're considering how to travel in a greener way. When you do choose to fly, you can pack less and take a direct flight and also fly coach. Things like packing less means that there's less weight on the plane, and so less fuel has to be used. When you're taking a direct flight, the most fuel is used at takeoff and landing. And so if you just take the direct route to get there, again, that's a win for you as a traveler, because who wants to be on airplanes longer than you have to? And then it's also better for the environment as well. Google Maps just released this really cool feature that they will automatically show you the most eco-friendly route by default. So if you're driving somewhere, you can use Google Maps to get somewhere. And they actually found with that data that oftentimes you're not sacrificing the speed at which you're getting somewhere. They're just looking at different factors for how you can get somewhere in the most eco-friendly way. Last but not least, of course, you can take public transportation. And in my opinion, that again is a better way to see the destination that you're visiting like a local as well. Carbon offsets. We just hosted an event on this last week. It's an hour long. It's on our YouTube if anyone wants to check it out. There's a lot that you can unpack here with carbon offsets. And I'm not going to go too deep on this, but just as a broad overview, carbon offsets, there's different types of programs. So you could have a carbon offset that's something like forestry. So you're planting trees, or you could have renewable energy. You could have blue economy projects, so things that are focused on ocean conservation. So there's a lot of different types of projects. There's varying levels of authenticity in terms of their impact. There's also verification programs that you can use to make sure that you are purchasing a carbon offset that actually has a positive impact on our world. Again, there's a lot to dive into there, so I do recommend watching that video and learning a little bit more. But the main takeaways that I would like you to kind of glean from that are, number one, really focus on minimizing your carbon footprint before you start thinking about carbon offsets, because otherwise you're kind of just putting a Band-Aid on the problem without really addressing the system as a whole. And number two, I would highly encourage you just to book with brands that automatically offset your carbon for you. So there's some really great companies out there that are doing that. Intrepid Travel is one of them. I think that it should just be included in the cost of your trip because it does take a lot to research and find out which one is right for you. But that's kind of, again, my personal opinion. I think that brands should just do it. So the more that you as a traveler purchase with brands that are doing it, the more that they're saying this is a viable economic opportunity for them to invest further in the environment. Two projects that I wanted to give a shout out to. The one on the right is Carbon. Carbon is a great app that lets you figure out what your carbon footprint looks like. You take a quick quiz. It tells you how many pounds of carbon each month that your footprint is based off of your lifestyle habits. And what I really like about their approach is that they are following these kind of tactics to say, here's how you learn more about your footprint. Here's how you can adapt your behaviors. And then you're thinking about mitigating and offsetting your carbon from there. The last category that they have is influencing. And so that's when you kind of say, I've done all of these eco-friendly habits and I am offsetting my carbon, but then now how can I go out and convince my mom to do that or my sister to do that or someone else? I also want to give a shout out to Tomorrow's Air. Tomorrow's Air, we're actually, Impact Travel Alliance has partnered with them and we are working with them throughout the month of April and beyond to talk about their permanent carbon storage system. And so basically what this machine is, it's a tech-based solution that essentially sucks carbon from the Earth's atmosphere and then permanently stores it in these porous rocks. And so that we don't have to worry about it being in the atmosphere anymore. So I think that that's pretty exciting and thinking about these opportunities that exist. There's not one silver bullet to fix the climate crisis. We're going to need nature-based and tech-based solutions. And I think that kind of by reframing it around that narrative and saying there's opportunities like Tomorrow's Air, there's opportunities like planting trees or investing in renewable energies. There's all of these different ways that we can really focus on combating the climate crisis. And here's how we can work toward a more environmentally conscious world through each of those solutions. So this is one of them. We are encouraging our community to sign up for Tomorrow's Air. If you sign up for Tomorrow's Air this month in particular, it's our challenge for the month. We'll have 4 throughout the year. Many of you all know our diversity and inclusion challenge that we launched in February of this year. If you're not familiar, it's still on our homepage at impacttravelalliance.org. This is our second challenge of the year. So for anyone who signs up with Tomorrow's Air, it's a subscription program that starts as low as $10 a month. You're essentially becoming an impact investor in this tech-based technology and helping to remove carbon from the Earth's atmosphere. So we'll be able to calculate how much carbon our community is removing from the Earth's atmosphere by participating in this challenge. So I do really encourage you to head on over to Tomorrow's Air and sign up with them. Moving on to where to stay. I have a couple of examples here. Costa Rica, again, I'm talking about this a lot, just to kind of look at kind of what we've traditionally thought about as ecotourism. And Bodhi Surf and Yoga is a great property in Costa Rica. We hosted an event with them last year. You can find the recording on our YouTube as well. They have a ton of different initiatives that are really rooted in eco-conscious travel. But so that's traditionally what we think of a far off the beaten path, off the grid destination and somewhere like Costa Rica. But I also wanted to share opportunities like One Hotel. This property is in South Beach. So again, thinking about green travel from the context of not just a rural destination, but also an urban destination. Bodhi and One Hotels, of course, they're both at a little bit of a higher price point. And I want to think about different travel styles as well. So if you are a budget conscious traveler, Hosteling International they have some great green focused initiatives. This property that I picked is the one in New York City. I live in New York City, if that wasn't obvious to anyone, but I think that this property is really great. That backyard space is actually the largest private outdoor backyard outdoor backyard. That's the largest private outdoor space in Manhattan. So they have a beautiful property, and Hostelane International has some great eco-conscious initiatives as well. So you don't have to spend a lot of money in order to be able to travel green. Certification. I get this question too a lot. I'm trying to cover a lot of my frequently asked questions. Why isn't there just one site that aggregates all of the certified sustainable properties? It seems like that would kind of be a no-brainer to say, let's just take all of the sustainable properties around the world, put them on one site, like Expedia or Booking.com or whatever, and just say this one's sustainable. You should go there. It is a harder problem than you would think, and that stems from a couple of different issues within the industry. First of all, so a certification program would be something where it's essentially a check that says this is a company that says that that brand is actually sustainable. So there's a lot of different certification programs out there, and that's because every destination is unique and there's no one size fits all solution. Also, greenwashing exists. If you're not familiar with greenwashing, it's when a brand either lies about or inflates their eco-conscious claims. And so that could be anything from saying that this is a green hotel and putting that into the title, or a green tour, or it could be something like a hotel not washing your towels and saying that that is because they're eco-conscious, when in reality they're just trying to save money and not pay their staff as much, or not wash as many clothes or sheets in any given month. Another problem that exists is green hushing. So green hushing is the opposite of that, and that is when a brand doesn't want to talk about their eco-friendly initiatives because they're afraid of backlash from consumers usually. So just to kind of make a differentiation there between greenwashing versus imperfect brands, there are no brands out there that are 100% sustainable. There are no brands out there that are doing 100% of the right things when it comes to diversity and inclusion. All of these different things are a journey, and the brands that you want to book with and work with and support are the ones that are out there willing to admit that their brand or organization isn't perfect. Impact Travel Alliance is one of those. There's plenty of others out there. I know Wonderful recently posted an article that talked about being an imperfect brand as well. So just because greenwashing does exist, that doesn't mean that as a consumer, you should be going out and kind of blacklisting different brands because you don't think that they're doing everything 100% right 100% of the time. Another issue with certification programs is that some brands choose to get certified and others don't. That doesn't necessarily mean that one is sustainable and the other is not. In my opinion, there's no excuse for a corporation not to be certified because corporations have the funds and the resources to be able to do so. It's a pretty intensive process to get certified. It takes a lot of time and it can take a lot of money. So there's a lot that goes into that sometimes a small business can't do, but a corporation should always be doing it. So that's kind of, again, why it's a messy space with different certification programs. And this is what it results in. As a traveler, you see all of these different travel companies out there, and you see that some are certified, some aren't. Some are certified by a company, but you don't know if that program is legit or not. So those are all of the certification bodies that exist out there. Solutions, however, do exist. There's a fantastic organization called the Global Sustainable Tourism Council. And so they're one step above a certification body, and they're an accreditation program. So what they're essentially doing is working to clean up the certification process and the different systems that exist out there and say, here's a set of global sustainable tourism criteria. Those are publicly available on their website. They have been reviewed by more than 80,000 different professionals when they launched them. It's a very collaborative process in terms of how they've put together these different criteria, and they continue to iterate on them and improve them to essentially say, here's the world's sustainability standards. And then here's how certification programs and certification bodies can work within them to make sure that those criteria align with the sustainable tourism criteria. One step above the GSTC, which many don't know about as well, is the ISEAL codes of good practice. And so the GSTC does adhere to and align with the ISEAL codes of good practice. That is not tourism specific. That is looking at all of the industries across the board and looking at what the best practices are for sustainability. So those are kind of the different layers of trust and value between those certification bodies. Again, not all brands will choose to be certified. In broad strokes, I would highly recommend only booking with brands that are working toward certification if they are bigger brands. And then smaller brands, they usually do a really good job of wanting to explain to you what their eco-friendly initiatives look like as well. So you can just ask them some questions. This is the easy solution. Book Different. If you are looking for a place to stay that's green, you can go to Book Different, type in where you want to go. They have over 1 million accommodations around the world. They are GSTC aligned. So you can look at their eco labels. If you go into their footer, you can dive deeper into how they're rating their greenest choice, which is this little guy. You can actually see this icon change a little bit on each of the listings. And that is GSTC aligned. So you can book in confidence that you are having a positive impact through that or that hotel or property that you're booking on. A couple of other that are GSTC aligned, and you can find these on the GSTC's website, but you have Rainforest Alliance, EarthCheck, Travel Life, and Green Globe. The B Corps are also GSTC aligned. So there's a lot of brands and labels out there that are pretty easily recognizable once you familiarize yourself with what that process looks like. And again, I think it's really important to consider those different steps to really know this is why there's a certification body and how you can find one that's legit or not. Thinking about what to do when you get there. A lot of people hear green travel and they think about things like beach cleanups. This is trash that I picked up in Vieques. And I actually talked with the hotel owner of the property that I was staying at, and he said it was really a shame that there was trash on the beach, but also that because of the hurricanes that were there a few years ago in Vieques, they hadn't started up their recycling program yet. And so not just the hotel, the entire island of Vieques. So that's just another thing to think about. It's great to pick up trash when you're on the beach. I think that, again, it's an activity that really brings you closer to nature and really can have a positive impact on that destination, even if it's just for the sake of taking a photo, but also take a moment to think about the systems as a whole and how you can advocate for systemic change as well. Also keep in mind, you don't have to volunteer or give back to have a positive impact when you travel. Participating in something like a community-based tourism experience is a great way to just go on a tour or visit a destination and have a great time and do so in an eco-conscious way. That also has a positive impact on the community without necessarily having to volunteer your time. And I think that that's really important to think about. In the United States, we only get on average 2 weeks or so of vacation each year. And most people at the end of the day don't want to have to do a bunch of work on their vacation. So if you want to do it, but also just kind of keep the bigger system in mind as well. Food is one of my favorite topics to talk about. You can go green by eating green. Some tips are to eat local. On average, your food travels 1,500 miles to get to your plate. That is a very long way. You're contributing to carbon emissions because your food is in a truck being transported somewhere. But at the end of the day, you're also eating food that isn't from that region. It's not as fresh and it's not going to taste as good. So eating local is a great way to support local farmers and also have more unique cuisine to the region. You can also eat seasonal. I know that cherry season is coming up, and I know this because when I was a kid growing up, we used to always go up. I lived in Michigan at the time, and we used to always go up and take a road trip to northern Michigan. And I remember eating cherries every year throughout the summer, and that's because that's when they were in season. And that's a great opportunity to go green by eating green as well. Lastly, I know you hear this a lot, try vegetarian. It's a really, really easy way to reduce your carbon footprint. I personally just don't eat beef, and I found that that's a really easy way. For me, beef is usually it's the biggest contributor to the climate crisis in terms of the meat that you're eating. So you can cut out one type of meat like that. You can go completely vegetarian or completely vegan, or you can say, hey, I just want to try vegetarian for one night a week. So kind of, again, start where you are and continue to move further on your eco-conscious journey from there. Last but not least, I want to talk about what to pack. And you may be wondering why I put packing at the end of my presentation, because normally you're thinking about that after you've picked your destination or when you're getting ready to go. And I've kind of already covered all of that ground. And I just wanted to remind everyone that sustainability is a lifestyle that starts at home. So eco-friendly habits are easier to incorporate when you're already incorporating them in your day-to-day life. If you can imagine going to a foreign destination that you've never visited before, and you have to learn the basics of a new language, you have to learn a new transportation system. If you're adding in something else that you have to learn, like an eco-friendly habit, that's going to make it even harder when you get there. I also want to reference the Booking.com study that I shared earlier. At the end of the day, their study shows this. We are human travelers. While we're interested in sustainability, their study shows that travelers don't want to sacrifice comfort or price for sustainability. So inherently as humans, we are selfish. Again, if you only have 2 weeks of vacation each year, how can you kind of embrace that eco-conscious mindset without feeling like you're bogged down with a bunch of different rules? So I like to think about this as kind of thinking about what shifts you can make that also improve your life. So one of my favorite recommendations for packing is actually packing a shampoo bar. I use shampoo and conditioner bars. In a previous life, I actually worked as a hairstylist. So I've done a lot of research on shampoo bars, different brands that work for different types of hair. If anyone needs recommendations, we'll send out those links as well. But I think it's a great opportunity to reduce your plastic. When you are thinking about a shampoo bar, it's not packed in plastic. You also don't have the weight from the water that's added to your shampoo. And so that's less of a carbon footprint when it's being transported to where you are. And then also when you're packing and you're flying somewhere, I don't have any liquids in my luggage, so I can just breeze through security because there's no liquids in there. So at the end of the day, that's a win for me because I think it's a better product for my hair. And then it's also better for the world and my security line process as well. So while I have spent the last 45 minutes or so talking about conscious consumerism and the different changes that you can make as an individual, I do want to touch on the fact that conscious consumerism is only one piece of the puzzle. It's also not the only solution because it inherently places blame on consumers by saying just reduce your plastic or just don't fly or just don't do these things. And it takes blame away from governments and businesses. So we do need actions from all sides. I do firmly believe that you can much more easily control yourself than you can a brand or a business. So kind of embracing that mindset of the changes that you can make as an individual, then you will learn more, and that allows you to advocate more. Those different tips and thinking about traveling in a more eco-conscious way are habits that you're picking up in your travel, but also your day-to-day life. That trickles into your professional life as well, and thinking about, oh, here's opportunities to go greener in our environment as well, or here's an opportunity to engage in my country's political system, and thinking about supporting more eco-friendly government officials as well. So the more you know, the more that you can become an advocate, and collectively we can build a groundswell of individuals who are really rooting for systemic change. So we do have just a couple of minutes left that I can take some questions. I'm going to catch up on everything that you all wrote. If anyone has questions they want to share in the Q&A, I will cover as many as I can in the next couple of minutes. Which brands are offsetting our carbon emissions? Someone anonymously asked. Intrepid is one of them that I mentioned. I know Off-Season Adventures is another small travel brand that does that. So is the Legacy Untold. There's a lot that are out there, and I would just encourage you to, it should be on their site as part of that booking process. And if they're doing it, they're talking about it. Someone asked, where does the boat ship travel fit in? That is also, I did not include that because it's another, I tried to condense this as much as possible. We'll have to probably do an entire session just to talk about cruises. Generally speaking, if you are on a smaller cruise ship, it's going to have less of a carbon footprint. The bigger that you get, the more the less eco-friendly it is. But there are corporations out there that are doing great work. Royal Caribbean, for example, did partner with the GSTC. And so for their off-boat excursions that you go on, they're actually partnering with the GSTC to prioritize tours that are GSTC aligned. So you know that each of those, not all of them, but they're doing a good job of bringing them on board and prioritizing them and helping to share that sustainability messaging. But we will probably have to do a whole session on cruises. Patricia asked, do you think to bring a checklist based on sustainable travel criteria could be useful for a traveler? Absolutely. We do try to produce a lot of those resources. For example, we have an article on our website for Impact Travel Alliance on how to find and book an eco-friendly accommodation. It is a little bit complicated because it's always going to be a little bit different depending on what your travel style looks like and what your budget looks like. I do know that Bodhi Surf and Yoga, which is the property in Costa Rica that I mentioned, they have a checklist for what to pack that's really great. And they cover everything from things like reusable water bottles down to a reusable tote or anything else like that. Again, I would really encourage you to think about opportunities that are becoming more eco-conscious in a way that benefits your life. So you're not thinking about, oh no, I have to pack a reusable fork or reusable everything, and that's adding to my packing list. Think about perhaps saying, okay, what brands can I book with that automatically incorporate that into their practices as a whole. And then someone anonymously asked, do you have some studies articles where I can find some more info about green flights? Yes, we will absolutely share those in the post-event email. And there's a lot of information there. I think one great resource, I know I mentioned Skyscanner, but if you do just look up their greener choices label, they do a great breakdown in terms of what those different flights look like and how they've created their algorithm. And I think that that's really important to think about easy solutions that have an opportunity to make eco-conscious travel easy, but then also backing that up with data and transparency and saying this is how we built it in a way that is more eco-conscious. So we will certainly send those over after the event as well. And there might be a couple of questions. Julian said, how are smaller locally owned places supposed to be able to find out and pay for these certifications? Is there an option which is aimed toward them? Again, it's really up to those smaller locations if they want to participate in a certification program. I personally think that I've worked with a lot of small businesses, so I can understand why it's hard to find the legit ones. It's hard to create the resources ranging from being able to pay for them to taking the time to be able to do it. So if you're a really small business that isn't quite ready to dive into a certification program just yet, Some easy opportunities that you can do are to go to the GSTC. They do have their criteria listed on their website where you can look at that and really map out what you're doing and kind of do a self-audit. A self-audit isn't going to be exactly the same as a third-party audit where someone else is doing it, but that allows you to kind of look at what you're doing and make sure that it is aligned with those sustainable practices. And again, I would really stress that as travelers, it's important to understand that small businesses can't always get certified just because they are a small business. But a lot of times the owner of the business, if you shoot them a DM on Instagram or you shoot them an email, they'll be really happy to tell you more about what their eco-friendly initiatives are. Oh, we had Elizabeth ask, what does 501c3 stand for? Sorry about that. In the United States, it is it's what Impact Travel Alliance, the organization, is filed under as a nonprofit and charity. So again, our mission is rooted, I'm not trying to sell you a travel experience or a product somewhere. ITA's mission is solely rooted in educating travelers. We have 2 more quick questions that I will try to run through. Hillary said, given how much you already do in this space, what do you find to be some of your biggest challenges in continuing to be increasingly sustainable? Again, I personally really embrace sustainability as a journey. There's always so much more that you can learn about. There's different components of this topic that I've touched only very briefly on, but you can look at your own personal identity. You can look at anti-oppression. To me, all of those components are really interconnected. And the more that you learn about each of those initiatives, the more that you see that there's opportunities to advocate for change. So I always try to wear a little bit of 2 hats, kind of thinking about my own journey as an individual for someone who's been in the sustainable travel space for a long time and what resonates with me and how I can learn more and also continue along with my sustainable travel journey, but then also thinking about it for someone whose new Impact Travel Alliance mission is rooted in not only reaching the travelers who already know that they want to travel sustainably, but also reaching travelers who are just looking for the best experience some way. So I always try to reframe it a little bit to say, here's opportunities for how you can have the best travel experience as well. So I would just say the short answer to that is that it is a never-ending journey of learning, but that's also part of the joy of travel as well. And Katie asked, how do you find the balance between greenwashing and green hushing? In my work, I often find myself between consumers who assume companies are greenwashing because they find it hard to believe that large brands are quote unquote sustainable. And then on the other hand, I work with these brands who withhold communicating because of this specific reason. How can large brands communicate without being considered as greenwashing? Any tips? Yeah, it's a balancing act. As consumers, I would encourage you to learn more about brands, watch their track record, hold them accountable. And as brands, I would encourage you to be transparent about where you're at and where you're going. So I've touched a little bit on diversity and inclusion. And again, that's really connected to environmental justice and social justice are very interconnected. So thinking about diversity and inclusion, a really great example is the Black Travel Alliance. They asked brands to share their data about where they were currently at with a couple of different data points ranging from their senior leadership team to how many Black creators were on press trips. And I think that that's a great starting point, thinking about something in terms of saying, let me do an internal audit. Let me look at where I'm currently at. Let me share that with travelers and individuals within my community and say, this is where we're going. And then to continue to check back in and say, this is where we started. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't think anyone expects anyone to be perfect. But continue to really hold true to that core mission and continue to work toward improving. And that's something that I think travelers respond really well to, is that transparency and honesty in their marketing. So that is just about everything for today. A big thank you for everyone to attending today. Again, you will be sent a recording of this session as well as the links to everything. And of course, to stay involved with Impact Travel Alliance, we have a ton of really great events coming up this month. We have 9 in total this month that are all focused on the intersection of travel and protecting our planet. So I would encourage you to visit our website, find us on social media at Impact Travel Alliance, and stay involved in our community. Have a great day, everyone.